One night, after inspecting the setup of a 10th birthday party, Lily Thompson returned home late. The party she had overseen that evening was for a 10-year-old. Normally, Lily wouldn't take on such a small-scale event. However, the child's mother had once recommended a project to her when she was just starting out. Lily was grateful to this benefactor who had reached out to her during her tough times. Even though that particular cooperation hadn't worked out in the end, before going to bed, Lily's mind was still filled with scenes from the party, the check-in area, the dessert station, the dining area, the game and interaction zone, the exquisite favor area, and the scenic corridor. Every space was decorated with great care, fulfilling all the little girl's wishes and fantasies of being a fairy, having butterflies, and celebrating her birthday in a fairy tale world. Lily couldn't help but recall her own 10th birthday. It seemed so long ago that her memories had faded. She could only think of it in terms of her childhood in general. Ignoring the specific year, her childhood amusements mainly consisted of playing elastics, hopping in grids, playing catch-ball, having snowball fights, and building snowmen. She had never been to the movies, never visited an amusement park, never owned a toy, never worn a princess dress, and had never had a proper birthday celebration. For her, being able to have enough to eat and wear and going to school in the city was already the greatest blessing. Some people are born princesses, while others dream of being princesses their whole lives. Lily's reverie was interrupted by the continuous vibration of her phone. It was her mother, Mrs. Thompson, calling. As soon as Lily answered, her mother choked out a "honey," and then was overcome by sobs. Lily suddenly remembered that her mother had messaged her more than once recently, asking if she was busy. She was always occupied, either buried in designing plans, communicating with clients about projects, on business trips out of town, or at event sites like the previous night. Sometimes she could reply briefly, but other times, with so many messages coming in, she simply didn't notice. By the time she remembered to call back, several days had passed. Lily had a bad feeling. She sat up abruptly and asked, "What's wrong, Mom?" On the other end of the line, there was still no response, only the sound of her mother trying hard to hold back her sobs, which came through the phone like a dull knife of life. It didn't cut the flesh, but the pain went straight to Lily's heart, leaving her feeling devastated. After the call ended, Lily opened the window. In the early morning of late autumn, there was a slight chill in the air. In the east, a golden red glow emerged, and the sun was about to rise. How many more sunrises like this could her father see? He was not even 60 years old yet. The next day, Lily traveled from New York to her hometown, Boston, which was miles away. She spent a day coordinating her work, contacting experts, and making arrangements for her father's future treatment. As the eldest daughter in the family and considered a capable person by others, Lily knew that at a time like this, everyone else might break down or cry, but she couldn't. However, faced with the diagnosis of advanced lung cancer with metastasis and a life expectancy of about 6 months, there was only so much she could do. Her father, Mr. David Thompson, didn't know anything about his condition yet. Mrs. Thompson was worried that if her husband found out, he would be so devastated that his health would deteriorate even faster. Her younger brother, Tom Thompson, had always been a bit of a troublemaker and didn't have much say in the family, especially since his sister had come back. He naturally didn't voice his opinion. It was true that a person's mental state could affect cancer, but in this situation, treatment was necessary to extend his life as much as possible, and it was almost impossible to keep the truth from him. Besides, if he really only had 6 months left, did her father have any unfulfilled wishes? If death was inevitable, Lily didn't want him to leave with regrets. Even though regrets were a common part of life, she still wanted to do everything she could. Surprisingly, it was Mr. David Thompson who finally brought up the topic. He asked Lily to go for a walk with him under the pretext of taking a stroll. The father-daughter pair left the neighborhood, crossed the street, and headed towards the riverside. Walking along the bank in the direction of a local park, this was something Lily usually did with her mother a few times during her visits home. Her mother would always call out after dinner, "Come on, let's go to the riverside." When they bought a house for her parents here, it was partly to make it convenient for them to take walks by the river. However, Lily never really understood what was so special about the riverside that made her parents go there so often. When she was at home, she was constantly busy with work. although she went out with her mother. Most of the time she was on the phone or sending messages. With her mind full of work matters and no attention for anything else, this was the first time she had gone out for a walk with her father. She tried to find a topic and asked, "What are they looking at, Mr.?" David Thompson followed her gaze towards the people sitting on the steps of the dam behind the local monument and said, "I don't think they have a specific target. Maybe they're just enjoying the atmosphere by the river." Lily didn't feel anything special about the atmosphere. She said, "In Los Angeles, they have those amazing fountains in the park with daily shows for tourists. Look at our big river here. All we have is this so-called high-altitude fountain with just one beam of light." Mr. David Thompson could tell she was being critical and smiled. "If you describe it as a sword piercing the sky, doesn't it sound a bit more extraordinary?" Lily still thought it was ordinary and stuck to her original opinion. Speaking of persistence, Lily remembered once when she took her mother out. They had a difference of opinion about something. Without much effort, her mother agreed with her. She had joked at the time, "Mom, why are you so easily influenced? You should stick to your own thoughts." She had thought her mother had some unique views, but her mother replied half seriously, half jokingly, "I'm afraid you'll leave me behind." Lily was stunned. In that moment, she suddenly realized that her mother had grown old. She was no longer as independent and assertive as she used to be. She had started to rely on her daughter, especially in unfamiliar places. At this moment, Lily dared not look at her father beside her. She lowered her eyes to hide the bitterness in her heart. David Thompson didn't notice anything amiss. He just thought that his daughter had seen a lot of the world and was more picky because of all the magnificent sights she had witnessed. He didn't argue and said slowly, "The steel structure of our #1 fountain was built in 2004. It's starting to corrode. To ensure it can be used normally every summer, we need to do welding repairs and reinforcements. Also, the lights on the truss, the floating barrels, the copper nozzles, and the steel cables are all reaching the end of their service life." Mr. David Thompson was born in the 1950s and graduated from high school. It was not easy for a rural child in that era to finish high school, but this knowledge about architecture seemed beyond what Lily thought her father knew. She was surprised that her father knew so much about the structure of this fountain that she didn't like and listened in silence. David Thompson sighed. "In our area, from November to April of the following year, it's the freezing period of the river. This makes it difficult to maintain and repair many projects." Lily nodded in agreement. "It's a cold place. In the old days, some remote areas here were like places of exile." Mr. David Thompson nodded and continued, "It's really cold. Sometimes it snows in September in some northern parts. But with the development since the reform and opening up, our lives have been getting better and better, and we don't feel the hardship as much." As he spoke, he stepped half a step towards the inner side of the road to make way for the people behind. Along the way, there were people walking, jogging, and groups of people singing and dancing. The sounds of people and music intertwined, making the simple activity of going to the riverside seem a bit more special. Just as Mr. David Thompson said later, "You young people like going to coffee shops not just for the coffee, right? Sometimes, going to a different place, experiencing an atmosphere that might not seem special to others, is also a part of life. Fishing isn't just about catching fish. And going to the riverside doesn't have a specific purpose. Sitting outside quietly for a while, feeling the river breeze, and taking in the moist air by the river might be a unique ritual for local people." Lily took her father's arm. She clearly felt her father stiffen for a moment. Since she left home at 18 to go to college, it had been nearly 15 years since they had been this close. After a long time, maybe just a few seconds, her father placed his hand on hers and gently patted it. Lily lowered her eyes and saw a rough, tanned hand with slightly protruding veins on the back. She looked up and saw her tall father with a thin face and fine lines at the corners of his eyes. Time treats no one with leniency, but it also doesn't spare anyone. It had left marks on her father, and it would eventually take him away. At that moment, a storm raged in Lily's heart. She quickly turned her face towards the river, letting the surging emotions in her eyes blend into the moist air. Before sunset, the father-daughter pair walked onto a bridge that separated two districts. This old bridge, almost as old as the city, had its original railway ballast removed. The two sides of the railway were rebuilt into a one-way road for bicycles, and a section in the middle of the bridge was paved with glass, through which people could see the original appearance of the railway from 100 years ago. The old bridge no longer carried trains, and the rumble of the old steam engines could no longer be heard, but it stood on the river like a mark of the times. Unyielding and eternal, Lily stood against the wind, looking towards the direction of home in the distance. Dad. She thought she had prepared herself mentally, but as soon as she opened her mouth, her voice trembled involuntarily, and she was choked with sobs. At a time like this, it was her father who remained calm. Mr. David Thompson said in a steady voice, "It's cancer, isn't it? I guessed it as soon as you came back." When he went to the hospital for a checkup, he thought it was just a minor illness. As he got older, it was inevitable to have some ailments, based on his symptoms of coughing, chest tightness, and pain. He thought it was probably a lung problem, like inflammation, fluid accumulation, or an abscess. He didn't think it could be anything worse. But after one hospital's examination, his son insisted on taking him to a cancer hospital for another check. The doctor asked him to wait outside and wanted to talk to the family members privately. His wife's recent behavior was also strange. Her eyes were always red, and when he asked what was wrong, she just said her eyes were dry and uncomfortable and that she was going to see an eye doctor. Mr. David Thompson almost believed her. Then, his daughter, who rarely had time to come home even during holidays, rushed back in a hurried Mr. David Thompson stroked Lily's hair and said, "People leave this world every minute. Illness, accidents, natural aging. These are all inevitable. Dad can handle it. It's just your mom." He asked with great solemnity, "Can Dad entrust her to you?" Lily didn't answer. It was as if as long as she didn't agree, her father would never leave Mr. David Thompson seemed to understand her thoughts. He said seriously, "Your grandmother passed away early. Your mother never got the chance to know her. So she doesn't have any experience with relations between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. Now she can take care of herself and live alone without a problem. But when she gets older, if she lives with your brother and his family, with your mother's personality, there might be conflicts, and she might be wronged." Lily sniffled. "Since you're so worried, then cooperate with the treatment and help me share the burden." To hide her grief, she said coquettishly, "You can't just care about Mom and ignore me. We're both your dear ones." Mr. David Thompson could hear the sobs in his daughter's voice, looking at her eyes that were trying hard to hold back tears. He promised seriously, "I'll cooperate fully." He didn't ask a single question about his illness, only saying, "I don't want surgery. It's not about the cost. Given my current condition, even if the surgery is successful, it's impossible to completely remove all the cancer cells. The post-operative recuperation and treatment will be very tough. And I'll basically be bedridden. I don't want to waste the little time I have left. If possible, I want to live my remaining days normally." Afraid that Lily might misunderstand him as being negative, Mr. David Thompson added, "Since you were 5 years old, I've been involved in ice sculpture making. At first, I was just a novice who knew nothing. It's been 28 years now, and my goal is to reach 30 years. When he said this, his eyes sparkled, and there was a hint of pride in his tone. Lily nodded repeatedly. "A 30-year veteran ice sculptor sounds really amazing." Mr. David Thompson smiled. The smile spread from his lips to his eyes, like a spark igniting from ice, with a warm and powerful force. Just like the young and energetic man in old photos. How wonderful it would be if time could stop and he could stay young forever. After a consultation with experts, it was confirmed that Mr. David Thompson couldn't tolerate surgery, facing the possibility of not surviving the operation. Lily, considering her father's wishes and the doctor's advice, decided on conservative treatment at Mr. David Thompson hoped to continue working before his body started to have serious reactions. Every year around the middle of the year, the planning and design solicitation for the local ice and snow festival begins. This year's design was finalized after 5 rounds of revisions. The festival area is divided into 6 core zones according to different functions. And Mr. David Thompson's team is responsible for the ice sculpture construction of one of the zones. The reason he had postponed his hospital checkup was that he was discussing and finalizing the construction drawings with the designers, due to the influence of the climate and the opening time of the ice and snow festival. From ice harvesting to the construction of ice and snow buildings and the installation of lighting. It takes at most 1 month to build the world's largest ice and snow theme park. One can imagine how fast-paced the work is during the rush to meet the deadline. Mr. David Thompson had to work outdoors for more than 10 hours every day in the freezing cold of -20 or 30 degrees Celsius to ensure the progress. He even had to live in the simple dormitory of the construction team. This would be a challenge even for a healthy young person, let alone a cancer patient in the advanced stage, but this was likely to be Mr. David Thompson's last participation in the Ice and Snow Festival construction. Lily understood her father's feelings as an old ice sculptor. She followed the doctor's advice and set a limit on the maximum time her father could work outdoors each day. She also insisted that he live at home to ensure his daily life was in order. Only then did her mother reluctantly agree, after accompanying her father through 1 round of treatment. Lily Thompson hurried back to New York. Her sudden trip home had completely derailed her work plans, and she had to work overtime for a whole week to get back on track. Subsequently, she adjusted her work arrangements and returned home again while ensuring the normal operation of her studio. She organized her team members to hold online video conferences, remotely listened to their work reports, provided guidance, and when it was time to travel for business, she simply grabbed her luggage and left. After finishing her tasks, she would first return to New York to handle work matters and then head back to her home in Boston. Her father, Mr. David Thompson, initially didn't want his illness to disrupt his children's work and lives. However, faced with his limited life expectancy, he understood his children's good intentions. He no longer worried about inconveniencing his son and started taking his son's car to and from work every day. Seeing his daughter's efficiency and the stunning design drawings of banquet halls created by her, he felt both gratified and proud. So he let her make her own arrangements. For over a decade, the family of 4 had been living apart in different places. But this time, they were finally reunited. During her breaks from work, Lily also managed to visit the ice harvesting site by the river. She witnessed the entire process of workers cutting the ice along marked lines, breaking it into blocks, and then using hooks to pull the ice blocks, which were floating on the river like rafts, onto trucks. Her father had told her that after the ice was transported to the site, it would need to be cut again according to construction requirements. So she also went to the construction site of the local ice and snow festival. Lily had moved to Boston with her parents from a rural area when she was 5 years old. Except for seeing the ice lanterns at a local park during a winter festival when she was in elementary school, she had never visited the ice and snow festival. As a native of this cold region, the ice and snow held no special appeal for her, in particular, since she was always sensitive to the cold. The long winters in the north made her feel extremely uncomfortable. Driving on icy roads was no easy feat. Lily managed to slide her brother's car to the construction site entrance with great difficulty. After pulling the handbrake, she took a deep breath and said, "I wouldn't dare drive in this cold without insurance." Then she immediately took out her phone and called her brother to scold him. "It's winter, and you still haven't changed to snow tires. Are you trying to do a snow drift?" Her brother, who was at work, endured her scolding meekly and obediently replied, "I'll change them tomorrow." Then, with a bit of childishness, he asked, "So, sis, are you going to send me a red envelope? Do I look like a red envelope to you?" Lily hung up the phone, wrapped herself in her down jacket, and got out of the car. The under-construction ice and snow festival site resembled a construction site, except that the building materials were ice instead of steel and cement. When building the ice walls, water was used between the ice blocks. Amid the rumbling of old cranes and various machines, Lily asked, "They have to rebuild this every year. Isn't such a large investment a waste? Why don't they create a year-round ice and snow project to solve the problem once and for all?" At this moment, a clear and distinct male voice came from behind her. "They are going to." The man was very tall, about 6 feet, approximate 1.83 meters, close to 1.85 meters. He was wearing an iron gray knee-length cold-proof suit, with a hat and gloves on. There was a thin layer of frost on the brim of his hat and his eyebrows, indicating that he had been working outdoors for a long time. That he walked towards her through the snow and said, "One of the top 100 provincial projects is a year-round ice and snow city. And they're currently working on the scenic area approval." Mr. David Thompson introduced to Lily. This is Mr. Chris Johnson, the head of the planning and design department. Lily, this is my daughter. Lily had heard her father mention this person more than once. She took her hand out of her down jacket pocket and greeted him politely. Hello. Mr. Johnson, I've heard so much about you. Chris Johnson's eyes fell on her bare hand. He took off his gloves and shook hands with her briefly. Your name is as beautiful as a poem. It's a great name. Lily nodded to express her gratitude. Chris Johnson then said to Mr. David Thompson, there's a problem with the ice for the main tower construction. The workers have been discussing it for a long time but still can't figure out where to make the additional cuts. Uncle David, could you go and take a look? Sure. I'll go right away. Mr. David Thompson was about to head towards the main tower area of the park when he remembered that his daughter was with him. Just as he was about to speak, he heard Chris Johnson say, I'm going to the amusement area. Ms. Thompson, if you're interested, you can come along. The construction site didn't allow outsiders to wander around casually. Before Lily came, Mr. David Thompson had already applied and reported. Since the route from the entrance to the amusement area that Chris Johnson proposed was exactly the one her father was going to take her, she replied. Sure, as long as it doesn't delay your work, Mr. Johnson. No problem. Chris Johnson motioned for them to turn left. Seeing her blowing on her hands to keep warm, he handed her the gloves he had just taken off. Put these on, or you'll be frozen through in less than 10 minutes. Lily had been in the South for so many years. To be honest, she wasn't used to the dry cold in the North when she first came back. She wasn't being coy. She thanked him, took the gloves, and pulled the hood of her down jacket over her head to end the cold winter in the North. Warmth is more important than looking good. As they walked through different areas, Chris Johnson would give a brief introduction. This year's Ice and Snow Festival is expected to use 150,000 cubic meters of ice and snow. We're building 6 areas, with 68 groups of ice and snow landscapes and hundreds of individual works. We hope to showcase the unique features, historical heritage, and the development of ice and snow culture of our city to the whole country through our unique ice and snow language. This year, the park has created an Inner Park Ice and Snow Carnival for the first time. It's an upgrade from just watching ice and snow to playing with it, adding ice and snow entertainment projects that weren't available in previous years. When they reached the under construction Inner Park, he pointed to the southeast and said, this year's Super Ice Slide is 423 meters long, and the Snow Slide is 327 meters long, the longest in history. In addition, we've added infrared chasing light interaction when tourists slide down the slide. The lights will change accordingly. As he led Lily towards the main tower, he said, this bustling construction site in front of you will turn into an ice and snow kingdom in 20 days. It's the shortest-lived building in the world. It will end its artistic life in less than 100 days and is an irreproducible art form. His words were filled with pride and love for ice and snow. He was also telling Lily that each session of the Ice and Snow Festival had a different theme, and they strived for innovation in design every year. They rebuilt it every year, and each year was different. Lily then thought of a question. After the year-round Ice and Snow City is built, will they still build the Ice and Snow Festival? Yes, they will. Chris Johnson said firmly. The Ice and Snow Festival embodies the craftsmanship of countless participants. It's a never-repeating fairy tale. The year-round Ice and Snow City can be visited by tourists at any time, while the fleeting Ice and Snow Festival is like a winter invitation from our city to the whole country and even the world, inviting everyone to experience the most beautiful winter scenery. Just hearing about it made Lily feel it was a very romantic thing. She began to look forward to this year's Ice and Snow Festival. After that, the topic of ice and snow came to an end. Chris Johnson changed the subject. I knew you were coming today, so I came here on purpose to meet you. When he took the initiative to invite her to look around, Lily sensed that there was something up and had been waiting. Chris Johnson looked at Mr. David Thompson, who was directing the workers to recut the ice in the distance, and said, the company originally decided to send Uncle David as a representative of ice sculptors to the International Ice Sculpture Art Festival in Poland this year. But considering his current physical condition, we're in a dilemma and would like to get the opinion of his family. From the company's perspective, They could easily send someone else. There was no shortage of excellent ice sculptors in the city. Mr. David Thompson was just one of them. Not irreplaceable. He was currently a cancer patient with a poor physical condition, and if anything went wrong, someone would be held responsible. However, such an opportunity was of great significance to an old ice sculptor who had been practicing the art for nearly 30 years. The company felt reluctant to remove his name from the list just because they were afraid of taking risks. This dilemma was filled with human kindness. Lily was grateful and said, "I'll talk to the doctor. When is the latest I can reply?" This showed that she supported her father's participation. Chris Johnson replied, "The list needs to be finalized by the end of this weekend." That evening, Lily's mother, Mrs. Thompson, came back from outside, holding a bunch of red roses wrapped layer by layer. In the winter in Boston, flowers can get frostbitten in no time, so wrapping them is a technical job. Mrs. Thompson loved flowers. Every spring, she would scatter flower seeds in the small garden outside the first floor. The blooming period of roses is from May to June, although they can bloom in winter if properly maintained in a greenhouse with good control of light, temperature, water, and fertilizer. It's hard to regulate these conditions at home. So none of her potted roses bloomed this winter. Lily took the flowers to deal with them and said, "Did you buy these from the flower shop at the entrance of the community? That shopkeeper is not honest. I'll go and buy flowers next time." Mrs. Thompson explained. This was the last bunch. The shopkeeper said they were almost withered and would die in a few days. So he gave me a 50% discount. Try to save them and make them last a few more days. Lily couldn't help but laugh. Just like frostbitten flowers can't regain their vitality, these roses are already losing their petals. There's nothing I can do. Mrs. Thompson mumbled something. It was probably a complaint that her daughter, as a professional, couldn't even save a few flowers. Lily didn't hear clearly and asked with a smile, "Do you like roses so much, Mom? Did Dad give you roses when he was young?" Otherwise, considering her mother's thrift, it was hard to believe she would spend money on flowers. Mrs. Thompson pursed her lips. "When your brother was a kid, he saw someone drinking a certain drink and insisted on having it. I scolded him all the way but still didn't buy it for him. Your dad didn't have any extra money to buy flowers." When Lily was a child, the family was indeed not well off. Her parents' monthly salaries combined were only a few $dozen. The family of 4 lived in a 12-square-meter rented room, and she and her brother slept in a bunk bed. Their pocket money was limited to 1 popsicle a day. There really was no money for flowers. And Mr. David Thompson didn't have a romantic bone in his body either. Mrs. Thompson smiled and said, "When we moved that year, you gave me a lot of flower seeds. I planted them all, and only the roses bloomed the best. I remembered the flower bouquets you made and randomly picked a few, wrapped them in newspaper, and gave them to your dad just for fun." That was the first time Mr. David Thompson received flowers. That night, he found a large-mouthed beverage bottle and carefully inserted the roses into it. The next day after work, he bought a glass vase that he rarely took the initiative to contact Lily. But that day, he specifically called his daughter to ask how to take care of fresh roses before moving them to the vase. Since then, Mrs. Thompson planted a garden full of roses every year. She thought her husband liked roses, but she never knew that what he really liked was her. When she was planting roses, Lily put down the almost withered roses, put on her down jacket, and went out. When she came back, she had a trunk full of roses and several large water-holding containers. After Mr. David Thompson came home from work, she asked him about the methods of making and harvesting ice, then filled the containers with water in the yard and put the roses in. A few days later, Lily pointed at the ice blocks with roses frozen inside and said to Mr. David Thompson, "Dad, could you do me a favor?" She wanted the roses to bloom in the severe cold of -30°C. David Thompson and his daughter completed this romantic idea together. On the day of departure for Poland, Chris Johnson, who was the team leader, came to pick up Mr. David Thompson. When he saw the 2 1-meter-tall ice-sculpted roses in the yard, he was extremely shocked. Lily raised her eyebrows and said, "I saw fish in the ice blocks at the construction site that day, and Mom bought these withered roses. So I came up with this idea." Chris Johnson gave her a thumbs up. "You really deserve the top honors in the design industry. I'm impressed." Lily didn't fall for his flattery. Mr. Johnson. This isn't just a compliment. It feels more like you're setting me up. Chris Johnson said seriously. I'm truly in awe. Every word is sincere. During the trip to the International Ice Sculpture Art Festival in Poland, Lily also developed a sense of admiration for her father, after Chris Johnson proposed that Mr. David Thompson participate in the festival. Lily specifically went to the hospital. The attending doctor considered Mr. David Thompson's physical condition and mental state and thought it would be best if he didn't go, but if he really wanted to. It was also possible. To avoid worrying her mother, Lily decided to accompany her father. Lily wasn't interested in the other activities of the festival. When she decided to come with her father, she took over a project in Warsaw for her studio, with Chris Johnson's arrangements. She coordinated her time and participated in the exchange meeting for Chinese and foreign ice sculptors. Lily watched as Mr. David Thompson, wearing a new suit she bought for him, stood on the stage a bit nervously at first. Later, he spoke off script, talking about his experience and insights in ice sculpting in fluent Chinese, and his attachment and love for ice and snow. He said, "The land of Heilongjiang is a magical place. Ice and snow are a gift from nature. I love my job as an ice sculptor. Ice sculpting is the golden name card of my hometown. And I want to contribute to it. Unfortunately, I may not have the chance. But it doesn't matter. A new generation of young ice sculptors is emerging one after another. What I can't do, they can. And they will do it better." The spirit of the old masters lives on. And the torch is passed on. Lily stood under the stage, looking at her father with an expression of admiration. "He's not the dad I used to know," she said. Chris didn't say anything and waited for her to continue. Lily said softly, "My dad rarely traveled far in his life. In my mind, he was always just an old man who made a living by ice sculpting." She had never imagined that her father, who only had a high school diploma, had, through 28 years of perseverance and dedication, stepped onto the world stage. In Warsaw, Poland, when introducing Lily, people no longer said, "This is designer Lily," but, "This is the daughter of Mr. David Thompson." That additional title was just like his role in life. When her father was young, he was like a big tree, deep and steady, the pillar of the family. As he grew old, he became like an umbrella, no matter what storms came. He still tried his best to protect his family from any harm. Later, when her father's name appeared in foreign reports, Lily translated the foreign media's title for him, ice sculpture artist. "I don't deserve to be called an artist," Mr. David Thompson said with a smile. "I'm just your dad." Lily also smiled and said, "You're my dad. And my dad is an ice sculpture artist. There's no conflict." On the opening day of that year's Ice and Snow Festival, Lily went to the festival with her mother. Her brother and his wife also joined them. The family of 5 visited the Ice and Snow Festival for the first and last time. They took a group photo in front of Mr. David Thompson's ice sculpture work. Chris took the photo for them. And he also took a picture with Mr. David Thompson. Chris majored in civil engineering. Mr. David Thompson had learned a great deal of architectural knowledge from him. Mr. David Thompson said, "Chris is highly educated, has a good temper, and is very patient. He's like a little teacher to me." Chris smiled modestly. "You're flattering me too much." He then said to Lily, "When I first joined the company, the leader arranged for me to intern at the construction site. The old craftsman thought I knew nothing and didn't even come to me for things within my responsibilities. There were several problems, and my old leader criticized me a lot. Fortunately, Uncle David gave me a hand. He discussed designs with me and asked me questions about architecture." As he spoke, the smile on his face grew wider. "I was young and arrogant back then, talking big without realizing it, but those theoretical ideas, though lacking in practical experience, could be quite impressive sometimes. When the old craftsmen saw that Uncle David couldn't stump me, they probably thought, 'Hey, this young guy seems to know something.' And then they started to cooperate with me, which broke the deadlock." It's not easy to survive in the workplace. But of course, it was his own efforts that broke the deadlock. Not just Mr. David Thompson's help. Lily then thought of the books at home. "I always wondered why we had books like Conceptual Structure System and Principles of Building Structures at home. They're yours, right?" Chris nodded. Uncle David was very eager to learn. No wonder her father's knowledge exceeded what was expected of his educational background. It turned out that he had never stopped learning. Lily blurted out. I've read some of them too. When making changes in spatial design, it often involves modifications based on the building's structure. Chris thought she was going to talk about the relationship between spatial design and civil engineering. But then she said, your handwriting is so powerful and smooth. I even copied it. Her focus was actually on the notes he had written in the margins. Chris couldn't help but laugh. That night, Lily was chatting with her father. Why did Chris come back to Boston? As a master's graduate from Tongji University in civil engineering, he clearly had broader development prospects. Mr. David Thompson didn't answer but instead asked, why don't you ask him directly? It seems you two talk quite well. Lily objectively evaluated Chris. His experience and EQ are better than many people's. He can get along well with anyone if he wants to. I don't want you to misunderstand. Mr. David Thompson first clarified that he wasn't trying to match-make. Then he replied, some people in the company said that after graduating, Chris worked in a construction engineering company with an annual salary of nearly $1 million. But then he suddenly resigned and came back to his hometown. His girlfriend broke up with him because of this. And his father didn't talk to him for over a year. During that time, some workers took advantage of his youth and inexperience. And he had a tough time. When we talked, I asked him the same question. Chris told Mr. David Thompson about one of his previous experiences, when he was discussing a project and comparing it with a landmark building in the city. The other party showed great disdain and said that the building was built by the Russians when they were constructing the Chinese Eastern Railway and had nothing to do with the local people. Chris felt the regional prejudice. He said to Mr. David Thompson, it hurts me more to see my hometown being looked down upon than being underestimated myself. But it's undeniable that we're not developed enough. Having had similar experiences more than once, Chris finally decided to return to his hometown to develop. Individual capabilities are limited, and it's hard to change the situation. But someone has to do something. He must have thought that if even the locals were unwilling to stay, how could they expect others to help build their hometown? It wasn't an easy decision to come back, and he must have endured a lot because of it. Lily sincerely said, that's really remarkable. Of course. Otherwise, why would I appreciate him? Hearing his daughter make a tisk sound, Mr. David Thompson stopped in time and finally said, Chris is still single. Lily saw her father almost flee to the bedroom and couldn't help but laugh. This was the only time Lily could remember her father indirectly referring to her personal life. She wasn't young anymore. Some of her classmates' children were already in primary school, but she was still single. However, her parents had never pressured her about this. Even when relatives asked, they would defend her, saying that times had changed and young people's views on marriage and love were different. And one shouldn't be restricted by age. However, as a father, Mr. David Thompson still hoped that there would be someone to stand by his daughter's side. Even if his daughter was strong enough to take care of herself, she still deserved to have someone to walk with her through life's difficulties. Mr. David Thompson's health deteriorated rapidly the following summer. The cancer cells had spread to his liver and brain. He became thinner and weaker. By late autumn, his limbs began to swell. And the pain couldn't be relieved even with medication. He was no longer able to go out. Chris was still in charge of the new ice and snow festival project. Although Mr. David Thompson was too weak to participate in ice sculpture making on site, Chris still visited the Thompsons' home from time to time to discuss construction issues with him. The most common thing he said was, Uncle David, we can't do it without you. Lily knew very well that those so-called problems were not beyond Chris's ability to solve. So every time she saw him off, she would sincerely say, thank you. Chris never explained anything. He just smiled and said, I'm leaving. The old master who had introduced Mr. David Thompson to the ice sculpture industry and his young apprentice would always come to the house after work, braving the wind and snow. The old master would point at the young apprentice and say to Mr. David Thompson, looking frustrated, look at my apprentice, and then look at yours. The young apprentice was actually very smart, but he had just started learning ice sculpting and needed more practice. Mr. David Thompson would defend him, saying, when I was his age, I didn't even know how to use a carving tool. Your apprentice is not as good as mine. The young apprentice said with a grievance. Master, I can't use the small shovel well. I've ruined a lot of ice. Please teach me again. Mr. David Thompson then asked Lily to get his toolbox. The young apprentice quickly stopped Lily. Sis, don't get it. It's too late today. Let the master rest first. He then said to Mr. David Thompson with a smile. I'll come next time. Time and time again, Mr. David Thompson held on until the opening of that year's Ice and Snow Festival. Feeling needed. On the day he passed away, it was snowing heavily, the biggest snowfall of that winter. The swirling snowflakes seemed to be seeing off this old man who had been associated with the ice sculpture industry for half his life. Outside the window, the north wind howled. In the ward, Lily held her father's hand and sobbed. Dad, please go ahead and build our new home over there. After I finish my life's journey, I'll come to see you. We'll still be a family. She kept talking non-stop until Chris came to support her. She was so choked up that she could barely breathe. But she still kept saying, my dad can hear me. He can hear me. Perhaps Mr. David Thompson really heard his daughter's promise to still be a family. With his eyes closed, his expression changed from a slight look of pain to a calm and peaceful one. And he passed away serenely. Lily could no longer dream of being a princess because the king who loved her the most was gone. Before his death, Mr. David Thompson had instructed that there be no funeral, and his ashes should be scattered into the local river. He said that after fully retiring, he wanted to travel along with the water flow. In the future, wherever his children went, as long as there was water, they could pay their respects to him. In short, during his life and after his death, he didn't want to trouble anyone. Mr. David Thompson's master and Chris, who represented the company, discussed with the Thompson family, hoping to give everyone a chance to say goodbye to the old craftsman. Mrs. Thompson finally agreed to hold a small memorial service in a chapel at the funeral home. Chris was in charge of writing the mourning couplets. Lily and her brother personally decorated the memorial hall, replacing the chrysanthemums with roses. Mr. David Thompson loved roses. Not because they represented love, but because he had received roses from his wife. For him, roses were a symbol of his wife's love. In his life, he only loved roses. On the day of the farewell, many people came, including company leaders, colleagues who had worked with Mr. David Thompson, his apprentices, friends, and neighbors. Mr. David Thompson's eldest sister cried the most. When Lily and her brother were bowing to the mourners in return, they heard her say, I did everything I could when you were alive. Unlike those kids, their throats felt like they were on fire. Her brother was about to step forward, but Lily gave him a look, and he gritted his teeth and didn't move. Chris also heard it. He didn't know the conflicts within the Thompson family. Even if he did, as an outsider, he had no right to say anything. He quickly stopped Lily from bowing to him by holding her elbow and said, There's no need. That night, Lily's aunt came to the house and made a scene. When Chris rushed over after hearing the news, Lily was in the yard, wearing a thin cashmere cardigan, with her long hair casually tied up. She was squatting down, wiping the last ice sculpture her father had made for her and her brother. She looked vulnerable and gentle. Chris took off his down jacket and put it on her, then helped her up. Why aren't you inside? Is your mom in there? Lily looked up at the man standing against the light. His tall and straight figure made her feel a moment of daze. What's wrong? Chris asked, seeing her frowning and not speaking. His voice was soft and concerned. Did you get dizzy from squatting too long? Or are you cold? No, Lily said, and only then realized that her voice was hoarse. She coughed twice to clear her throat. What did you just say? Chris motioned with his chin towards the house. I asked why you're not inside. Is your mom okay alone? Lily said hoarsely. My mom is much stronger than me. My aunt can't win an argument with her. Chris stood there with his hands on his hips, speechless. Lily then felt the cold and tightened his down jacket. My grandmother passed away when my dad was still a minor. My aunt took care of my dad until he got married to my mom. She was like a mother to him. She blames us for not having my dad undergo surgery, saying that if he had, he might have lived a few more years. She said that my brother and I are unfilial and that she wants to fight for my dad's land in our hometown. I don't think she really wants to fight for it. It's probably just out of anger, since it's not worth much anyway. It was precisely because of her anger that she said those things at the funeral earlier. Her brother had asked in confusion, "What did Auntie mean by those words? Sis, why didn't you let me refute her?" Compared to her brother's indignant grievance, Lily said calmly, "I'm your sister. I used to hit and scold you when we were kids. Even now that you're grown up, you still get scolded by me. But if one day, I think your wife and children treat you badly, I'll act just like her." Lily was a sister herself. Although she and her brother had fought a lot when they were young and she still bossed him around even after he got married, she always took his side, putting herself in her aunt's shoes. Lily could understand her to some extent, so she didn't allow her brother to speak up and didn't retort to her aunt at all. Lily glanced through the window into the house and said, "She's my mom's older sister-in-law. It's okay for my mom to argue with her. Both of them are upset, and they're just venting their emotions on each other." As a younger generation, Lily really wasn't supposed to get involved in this situation. Chris looked at her slender fingers caressing the ice sculpture and said, "Don't you care about your hands?" Lily's hand froze for a moment. "It'll melt soon," she said, just like her father, who had disappeared from this world. At that moment, Lily finally understood that the irreplaceable quality that Chris had mentioned carried a touch of sadness. Chris didn't lecture her. He just said, "The fact that it existed is its own significance." The process of Mr. David Thompson carving it and the memories he left as a father wouldn't disappear just because the ice sculpture melted. Lily understood. She took a deep breath and motioned with her chin for him to leave. "Go home. Don't stay here and freeze." Chris lived in the same neighborhood as the Thompsons. Whenever Mr. David Thompson's condition worsened and needed to be taken to the hospital, Chris was always the first to arrive and offer help. Chris left as she said, but a few minutes later, he came back. He was still only wearing a black turtleneck sweater, clearly not having gone home. He held a box of throat lozenges in his hand, opened it, put one in his mouth, and gave the rest to Lily. Lily's aunt came out of the house. Seeing her niece wearing a men's down jacket and standing with Chris, she probably thought Chris was there to support Lily, so she stopped making sarcastic remarks and left in a huff, thinking of her father. Lily quickly followed and said, "Auntie, let me see you off." Her aunt kept walking without stopping and said angrily, "You don't even have a car. Are you going to walk me home?" Lily's car was in New York, and she usually drove her brother's car when she needed to go out. She wasn't angry at her aunt's words and said, "I'll call you a taxi." Her aunt pushed her and said, "I don't need you. I can call one myself." Chris held Lily back, and she didn't follow. She gave a bitter smile, took off the down jacket, and returned it to Chris. "I'll go check on Mom." Chris didn't go in. He put on the down jacket that still carried her body heat and stood outside. After Lily entered the house, she opened the window and said, "I'm fine." Chris nodded, made a gesture by his ear, indicating that she should call if there was anything wrong, and then turned and left. Mrs. Thompson had been ill but managed to gather her strength to sort through her husband's belongings. During Mr. David Thompson's ice sculpture career, he had participated in many ice sculpture competitions and won many prestigious awards. She carefully put away all the certificates, medals, and trophies. She also gave some magazines and newspapers to Lily. These were collected by Mr. David Thompson during his lifetime, including interviews with Lily, reports of her awards, and pictures of the sites of some of her design projects. Mrs. Thompson said, "Your dad always took these out to look at when he had nothing to do. He would tell everyone, 'My daughter is a designer,' and he was so proud." Mr. David Thompson rarely asked about Lily's work during his lifetime, and Lily never brought it up either. Thinking that her father didn't understand or care, there were some reports that Lily didn't even remember if she hadn't seen the physical materials left by her father. Mrs. Thompson also said, "Your dad told me not to rush you into. He said that when the right person comes along, you'll reach out and hold on to them. He said that our knowledge is limited, and we never gave you much guidance when you were young. You've achieved what you have today all by yourself. He told you to live the way you like without being influenced by anyone." After Mr. David Thompson's funeral, Lily had thought that her father was worried about her mother and had given instructions to her brother but had said nothing to her. She even thought her father was patriarchal, but it turned out that his silence represented recognition, trust, and respect. Mr. David Thompson recognized his daughter's achievements in her career, believed that she could take good care of the family, and respected all her choices about her future life. One day, Lily went to the riverside alone. She walked along the path she had taken with her father and came to the old bridge. She burst into tears. After crying herself out and calming down, someone approached from behind. It was Chris. He said, "I went to your house. Auntie said you might be here, and she was worried, so she asked me to come and check on you." Since learning about her father's illness more than a year ago, Lily had been suppressing her emotions so hard. She could no longer pretend to be strong and had a strong desire to talk. "I used to think that buying them a house and giving them money was being filial. I didn't come home for a whole year and rarely even called. But I didn't feel guilty. But on the day Mr. David Thompson passed away, when Lily was about to change his shoes, Mrs. Thompson said, 'Your dad liked those old shoes you bought him. He said they were soft and comfortable. He usually didn't wear them to work and only took them out when he went out.'" Lily was instantly heartbroken. Her back hunched over in that moment. She blamed herself and said, "Love is not just a noun, it's a verb. I didn't do enough when he was alive. I made him cherish a pair of old shoes." Chris didn't let her dwell on these negative emotions. He comforted her. "Just like it was Uncle David's first time being a father, it's also your first time being a daughter. At the end of his life, you coordinated everything to fulfill his wish to keep working. You took on the pressure alone, accompanied him to go abroad for the exchange, and made his dream come true. That's more than enough," he said gently in the cold wind. "Lily, don't be too hard on yourself." After the Qingming festival, Lily planned to take her mother to New York to stay for a while. Chris specially set aside time to see them off at the airport. Lily only thanked him and said nothing else. He didn't ask how long they would stay either, just said that if there was anything wrong with her brother, she should let him know and not hesitate. Because a close neighbor is better than a distant relative, Lily took it as polite talk. Without the work-related connection between him and her father, she thought it would be hard for them to have much contact in the future. Of course, she wouldn't really let her brother trouble him. But then, something unexpected happened. Her brother had a traffic accident one night while working overtime. His wife was pregnant, and it was not good for her to be emotionally affected. It would also take time for Lily and her mother to rush back. So Lily had no choice but to turn to Chris for help. It was already late at night. The phone was picked up after only 2 rings. Before Lily could speak, Chris asked, "What's wrong, Lily? What happened?" He knew that she wouldn't call him if there was nothing wrong. As soon as Lily started to explain, she could hear him picking up his car keys and opening the door on the other end. At that moment, her anxious heart suddenly felt at ease, and she subconsciously said, "Drive carefully." Before hanging up, he said, "Don't worry, I'm here." Then, until early morning, he sent message after message to let her know he was safe. "I'm at the scene. The ambulance is here too. Your brother is conscious. He has injuries to his right arm and right leg. The other driver seems to be in better condition than him. We're on our way to the hospital now. Your brother doesn't have any fractures. His arm is dislocated, and his leg has a bruise from the impact. It's not serious. The other driver is fine too. All of your brother's test results are out. The doctor said that if we had come a little later, his injuries would have healed on their own." Lily couldn't help but laugh. She wanted to say thank you, but she felt that these 2 words were too insincere to express her gratitude. Finally, she said, "I'll treat you to a meal when I get back." She thought he would decline, but after a while, he replied, "Okay, I'll be waiting." Later, Mrs. Thompson returned to Boston. Lily heard from her mother that after her brother recovered, he wanted to invite Chris to a meal, but Chris refused. He half joked, half seriously said, "I'll wait for your sister to come back and have that meal with her." When Mrs. Thompson invited him to dinner at home, he also refused, saying that he was busy with overtime work and couldn't make it. The beginning of July, Lily was receiving a client according to her schedule. When she saw the information given by her assistant, the person in charge of the Ice and Snow Festival project in the city, she was surprised that it was actually Chris. Lily pretended to be annoyed and said, "Why did you make an appointment? Wouldn't it be better to just call me directly?" There was a smile in Chris's eyes. "It's for work." The design work for the new ice and snow festival had started again. The company intended to invite Lily to be in charge of the design of one area. Lily was worried and said, "I do floral space design. It doesn't seem to match the style of ice and snow, does it? Frozen roses are a floral artist's way of giving back to life. It's the perfect combination of floral art and ice and snow." Chris opened his briefcase, took out a notebook, and turned to a page, next to an ice sculpture sketch. It was written, "If a flower blooms here." The handwriting was so familiar. Lily took the notebook and looked at it. "Is this my dad's work notebook?" Chris carefully opened the cover of the notebook and gently stroked the yellowed cover. "Uncle David said to leave it to me as a memento." He was a meticulous person at work. He didn't just leave things alone after finalizing the ice sculpture design. Mr. David Thompson had said that during the construction of the Ice and Snow Festival. Chris lived in the construction dormitory with them. He always carried the design drawings with him and was like a nanny for the construction, controlling the project quality and progress and communicating with the construction team in a timely manner to ensure that the actual ice sculptures matched the design drawings. Mr. David Thompson had commented on him. "He's not an ice sculptor, but he cares about ice sculptures just as much as we do. If everyone in this industry was like him, it would develop even better." He gave up a high-paying job and returned to his hometown. He said proudly at the construction site that the Ice and Snow Festival was a never-repeating fairy tale. He was such a gentle person, but his love for his hometown and ice and snow was so passionate, Lily couldn't refuse. She said, "I'll decide whether to take this project or not after we discuss the details." Chris looked relieved and took the initiative to say, "The company has a budget for the design. But the leaders know the value of designer Thompson. They know you're worth it." He emphasized with a smile, "They know you're expensive." This was to let Lily quote a normal price without any concerns. Lily smiled and deliberately tried to make an appointment with him for dinner that night. Chris didn't answer directly. Instead, he asked, "Is this to play the host, or to fulfill a previous promise?" Lily deliberately said, "It's a business dinner." Chris smiled and said, "Then I'm not sure if I'm available. I have an appointment with a friend tonight." Of course. That friend was Lily, and Chris paid for the so-called business dinner. He stopped Lily from paying and said, "Next time." That autumn, Chris made 2 trips to New York, and Lily returned to Boston once. They had meetings with the design team to discuss the design draft. The final design plan adopted Lily's ideas. Instead of setting up a separate frozen flower area, according to the theme of this year's Ice and Snow Festival, in appropriate areas, such as around the main structure, the Peak of Holy Fire, which was the highlight of the park. They arranged flame orchids symbolizing fire and other fire-related flowers at the ice walls and arches suitable for couples to take photos. They placed red roses and sunset coral peonies when the lights were turned on in the evening. The holy fire and the flowers bloomed simultaneously, creating a magical castle with a sea of flowers, more magnificent than fireworks and more like a fairy tale. Lily Thompson's design concept exceeded the client's expectations. However, her quote for the design fee was so low that it was almost negligible, which didn't match her professional level and status in the industry. Moreover, to ensure the desired effect, her studio took on the flower-related liaison work for free. She said to Chris Johnson, "I can't do it for free, but I can give you a special price as a friend. For my dad." Mr. David Thompson's wish had been to participate in the construction of 30 ice and snow festivals. The last one that he couldn't complete was now taken up by Lily. When the Ice and Snow Festival opened that year, Lily was negotiating a project in another city and unfortunately couldn't be present. Chris sent her a video of the moment when the lights were turned on. He also posted several pictures on his social media, seemingly trying to flood his feed with the ice and snow architecture that looked like it was straight out of a movie with just a casual shot. Lily carefully browsed through each photo and was pleased to find that the effect was even better than she had expected. She had fulfilled her design mission, and he had lived up to her design. Realizing all her understandings and expectations of romance, Lily saved a few of the photos Chris had posted and shared a post on her social media with the design concept she had written in the design draft: "Roses bloom in the cold winter, romance never fades, and love endures." Chris liked her post. During Christmas, Lily went back to her hometown and specifically visited the Ice and Snow Festival. She saw the ice sculptures that were going to be demolished at the end of the month. caressed the flowers frozen in the ice, and remembered the way her father used to carve ice with a carving tool. Her heart was filled with warmth. At this time, Chris voiced his, "Why didn't you want all the flowers to be fully bloomed when the flowers were transported by air and during the pre-freezing maintenance period? I wanted to force bloom them, but your assistant said you specifically instructed that there should be some fully bloomed flowers, some about to bloom, and some still in buds." Lily didn't answer but instead asked, "Why didn't you ask me about this on the phone?" During the construction of the ice sculptures, they had kept in close contact over the phone. Sometimes they would talk several times a day about a single detail. Yet he had never mentioned this, Chris said. "I remembered that at the dinner party in Warsaw. Not all the flowers were fully bloomed. I thought you must have had a reason." He was referring to the time when Lily had invited him and Mr. David Thompson to the banquet hall she designed after the International Ice Sculpture Exchange in Poland. Lily felt a warm glow in her heart because he had noticed this small detail and fully respected her creativity. She gently touched the roses in the ice with her finger and said, "The blooming of each flower is important. If they all bloom at once, no one will notice the differences between one flower and another. Flowers bloom one by one. And people grow up year by year. Give flowers some time, and they will bloom more brightly. Give those who are passionate about their pursuit some time, and let their craftsmanship burn like a never-extinguishing fire." All the beautiful implications and expectations are hidden in the flowers. That winter, the ice and snow tourism in Boston became extremely popular. Frozen roses became the city's romantic signature. On the internet, major short video platforms were filled with pictures of the city. It was constantly trending, and netizens were saying, "Boston really knows how to be romantic. This city has won big this time." When Chris forwarded these comments to Lily, she said with a smile, "The pressure is back on you again." Rebuilding every year and coming up with something new each time was indeed a great pressure. However, after a short silence, Chris replied, "Not necessarily." Lily thought he said this out of confidence. In her eyes, Chris was a capable and emotionally stable man. Such a person was able to turn pressure into motivation. So she didn't think much of it and didn't delve deeper. During All Souls Day, Lily was abroad and couldn't return to Boston as originally planned. Her mother and brother sent her messages, telling her that Chris had gone to visit Mr. David Thompson's grave with them. In the following 6 months, Chris visited New York several times. Lily thought he was on business trips and always made time to meet him. Her studio was near the Bund in New York. After dinner, they would take a walk there, chatting casually in the night or sometimes falling into an inexplicable silence, as if they were reminiscing or looking forward to something, whether they were talking or not. Neither of them felt awkward. Chris's gentle and warm-hearted demeanor always made Lily feel calm and safe. At the end of October, Lily returned to Boston from New York. Her mother told her that Chris was going to resign and move to another city for development. Was this man who couldn't stand others looking down on his hometown really leaving? Lily thought she had misheard. "Didn't you tell me on video a while ago that he was about to be promoted to vice president?" Her mother told the truth. "Your Aunt Chris said a few days ago that Chris had submitted his resignation." Lily was anxious. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her mother was confused. "You never seemed to care about these things." Lily usually didn't care about other people's affairs. But Chris was different. Without thinking about when Chris had started to hold a special place in her heart, she went directly to find him. The two of them walked silently and tacitly towards the riverside and once again went onto the old bridge, standing on the one-way street where bicycles occasionally passed. Lily looked at the distant cable-stayed bridge and got straight to the point. "You're about to get promoted. But you're resigning. Why? Don't you love this city and this job?" "There's what I love here. But what I truly love is elsewhere." Chris looked into her eyes. "You said that love is not only a noun but also a verb. It's time for me to take action and go to New York." Lily raised her eyes to meet his gaze, and her heart fluttered. "What for?" Chris's eyes sparkled. "To solve the long-distance relationship problem. They say long-distance relationships are hard to maintain. I don't want our relationship to start as a doomed one." No wonder he had said, "Not necessarily," when they talked about the pressure before. It seemed he had already made up his mind at that time. Lily asked, "So those previous trips to New York weren't business trips? What about your love for this place?" Indeed, they weren't business trips. Those times, Chris had taken time off. On one hand, he was arranging a new job for himself. And on the other hand, he was trying to bring new projects to his hometown. If he couldn't have both, he hoped to contribute to Boston in other ways. Lily understood his choices. With his ability, he could succeed anywhere. But starting over in New York wouldn't be easy. This decision must have been even harder for him than the one to return to his hometown. Moreover, she knew nothing about it. He had his concerns but still went straight for her without leaving himself an escape route. That he was quietly removing the obstacles of the long-distance relationship, showing his greatest sincerity towards their relationship. And yet, he said, any relationship requires effort. I'm investing in my feelings for you. You don't need to feel pressured. They were both adults. At this point, it would be pointless to pretend not to understand. Lily stopped hiding her feelings. She took out a contract from her bag. As soon as Chris saw the names of the parties on the contract, a smile spread across his face. He couldn't wait to confirm with her. You're coming back. The creative design of frozen flowers had caught the attention of the Cultural and Tourism Department in Boston. They sent people to New York to invite Lily, hoping that she could serve as a consultant and contribute ideas to the development of the local cultural and tourism industry. 3 years ago, if she had received such an invitation, Lily would have just considered it as a job opportunity and weighed the pros and cons. But influenced by Mr. David Thompson's craftsmanship spirit as an ice sculptor and Chris's determination to return to his hometown at all costs, Boston had become different to her. Hometown was no longer an empty word. It was an attachment and a source of comfort, especially because the people important to her were all here. Lily, who had never been overly sensitive to romance, now believed that walking side by side with a loved one was the ultimate romance. Lily, who had chosen to accept the invitation from her hometown, raised her eyebrows and said, so, Mr. Chris, the pressure is finally on you. Being the object of someone's pursuit was truly the most wonderful thing in the world. How could there be any talk of pressure? Happiness came so suddenly. Chris tilted his head slightly and smiled silently. After a moment of silence, he reached out his hand to her. Lily firmly placed her hand in his. Chris closed his fingers tightly around hers and asked with a smile, can you take me to your home for dinner now? No wonder he had always refused the Thompsons' invitations to dinner. It turned out he had been waiting to go with her in a different capacity. Lily shook his hand and said, let's go tonight. But Chris said, tomorrow night. I need to prepare and bring some gifts. The two families were so close that he used to enter their house as if it were his own. Now he wanted to prepare gifts. Lily was speechless. Then, she changed the subject. So, are you still leaving? What a question. Chris said, my love and passion are all here. Where else would I go? Lily asked again, what about New York? Chris's expression remained unchanged. I'll handle it. Lily was worried. If you don't go, can you still keep the project? Chris said confidently. A $3.5 billion investment. It can't be lost. He hadn't even arrived in New York yet, and he was already planning to bring $3.5 billion back to his hometown. Lily was extremely shocked. Are you sure you're just getting promoted to vice president? Aren't you planning to replace the president and take over? Chris laughed heartily. That'll happen sooner or later. He looked very confident. The project had a large investment. The negotiations went through round after round, and the project plan was revised again and again. Fortunately, Boston had its unique advantages, and its cultural and tourism industry was booming. There was huge potential and room for the development of ice and snow tourism. In April of the following year, the New York side finally reached a cooperation intention with Boston. They planned to jointly build an ice and snow park demonstration area and explore the ice and snow industry together. After the signing ceremony was successfully completed, Lily and Chris, who had been busy for months, went to the old bridge again in early April. It was still cold in Boston. The main stream of the local river had just thawed, and ice floes of various sizes collided with each other as they flowed downstream, making a cracking sound like a symphony of winter giving way to spring. Lily threw rose petals into the air, letting them scatter on the river surface and float away with the ice. Chris consciously stood in the wind to shield Lily from the cold. He told Mr. David Thompson the good news about the ice and snow park demonstration area and finally said, don't worry, Boston will have a bright future, and will be better and better. After Lily had thrown all the petals, she said softly to the distance. Dad, I miss you. Chris took her hand and said, back then, you were still a kid. Studying at school while Uncle David was working at the construction site. When you came home from school, he was still working overtime. Later, when you started working, you went to New York, and he stayed in our hometown. You traveled a long way to visit him, but he happened to be sent abroad for an ice and snow exchange. By the time he came back, you had already left again. He was always there, but you two just kept missing each other. Lily listened quietly to his understanding of the loss of a loved one, trying hard not to let her tears fall. She choked back her sobs and said, although Dad is no longer with me, as long as I remember him, he will always live on. Chris didn't say anything more. He put his arm around Lily's shoulders and gave her a gentle squeeze to comfort her. After her emotions had completely settled, he asked, what do you think is the difference between the Huangpu River and the local river? Lily thought carefully and said, they're the same. Chris looked down at her. How so? The flowing Huangpu River with its dazzling neon lights at night was the glamorous Bund in Shanghai. The city's outline became blurred in the wind and snow. And the artistic conception was like a poem. This was the fairy tale like Boston. And this was the riverside. As the sun set, the afterglow filled the river. And the city was filled with the warmth of human kindness and the hustle and bustle of daily life. Lily stood side by side with him and said, the same kind of romance. It was the same kind of romance that could make the older generation and the younger generation alike burn with love for this city.